So one of the things that I wanted to do during the organization of this symposium was to have some panel sessions where we could get into a little bit of discussion, not just talks, and also provide maybe some insights or recommendations or advice to people in the audience, to graduate students, about how to shape their career as well. So this first panel is startups and PhDs. And the focus is kind of like the alternative career path to traditional academic research. So all of the people on the panel have kind of taken a different approach to their careers by becoming more on the entrepreneurial side, startup companies and so on. Some have began their careers at large industrial companies, Microsoft, maybe Microsoft Research or Google, but are now working on entrepreneurial efforts. So I'd like to start actually by going around the panel and have each panelist sort of briefly introduce themselves, particularly from their, if you would, startup resume. So what have they been involved in since graduating, to set a little bit of context for where they are today, and the roles they have played in those companies. So we'll start with Yao.
Hi, my name is Yao. So I joined a startup with my friend in around 2000. That's called Gigabit, and we was doing like music, search. After that, I joined Google, and
You might tell us what happened to that company.
So, as you remember, most company around 2000 went kaput. So same with my company. It's a failed. My first startup is a failed one. So I basically learned quite a bit from that, and basically joined Google and basically focus on working to deliver like a very high performance ad system, because so I lead the ad serving team at Google for like 5-6 years. So I developed like a very high performance ad serving, the next generation of ad serving system, and it's still being used right now. And in around 2011, I left Google to form a startup, to co-found a startup with my friend, and that's called Urban Engines. And we've been doing like big data for mobile analytics and mobility movement. We start with basically transit agency first, but we now move into like for all forms of mobility, like last mile delivery or even taxis. So.
Cool, thank you. Gunho?
Hello, I'm Gunho. I graduated about 3 years ago. So after graduation, I came back to Korea to join an online game company, and then soon I just came back to here to do a startup, which is doing educational technology and making learning apps for children on tablet devices for young age children, like kindergartners, first, second graders, to help them, especially when they have difficulties in learning math or something like that. Then we thought the tablet devices and touch-based interface will lead them new way to learn. So that's what I'm doing right now, which is quite different from what I did in the university. So it's kind of interesting.
Thank you, Gunho. Ilan.
My name's Ilan. It's good to see a lot of faces, by the way. This is quite an event. When I graduated, I co-founded a company with somebody who I think many of you know, Steve McCann. We co-founded a company called Fast Forward Network in the media broadcast distribution space. After that, I left that company and came and took over technology at a company that had been founded by Armando Fox, that was in the mobile computing, one of the early mobile web browsers. If you remember Metricom modems and Palm Pilots, we had Velcro with Metricom modems on Palm Pilots with a front end that was a full Mozilla front end with a back end up in the cloud. This is in '99. Ended up selling that company into a company called Pumatech, which was IntelliSync at the time, when we still didn't have internet connectivity with mobile devices. And we were synchronizing all of our data between desktops and mobile devices. there was really no job there for me. So ended up deciding, okay, let me see what consumer is like, and took over the CTO role at a company called OmniSky, which was this big play to try and build the AOL of wireless. Again, mobile computing front and center. Got exactly what I expected, which was lots of business exposure, lots of understanding of what a P&L and a balance sheet was, because I didn't know any of that. When I walked in there, there was not a lot of technology going on there, but that was okay for a couple of years. And then, just like Yao was saying, we ran into the dot-com bust. We went up, we went down. But overall, frankly, I like to say that was almost like my MBA. It was well worth the experience, and I got exactly what I wanted out of it. Then got a call to join a company that I was done with the eyeball. If we just build it and take a penny from 600 million people, look how much money we'll make. I was ready to go back to a business model where we built something for $1, sold it for $1.50, and we kept 50 cents. So found myself in a very different space in an appliance business that was building what can only be described, for those of you that know the term, as an active networking node from the old tenement house days. And that's actually what attracted me to it. And it was a marriage of high-speed compute with high-speed networking, trying to build infrastructure where you could run full-blown software applications in the network. This is in 2003. And ended up riding with that company, eventually running that company, embedding that whole technology in the cybersecurity market, and ended up running that company for about 8 or 9 years. As I like to say, the company wasn't going public, it wasn't going out of business. So at some point, it was time to do something new, and kind of did an about face and got an opportunity to join the marketplace lending company, Prosper, that was turning itself around in 2013. The guy who was coming in there to be the CEO was a personal friend of mine, and I basically said, look, you're a banker, let me build up the technology side, and that's what I ended up doing for the last couple of years. I just left there and am kind of doing the proverbial, who knows what's next.
Serial entrepreneur.
What was that?
Serial entrepreneur.
I don't know if it's serial or not, but
How a parallel entrepreneur.
looking for a new challenge.
Shelley, thanks for making it.
Yes, I made it. I'm Shelley. I graduated, almost 10 years ago. So it's also really nice to see familiar faces here. So I went straight into the dark side of venture capital after graduation. So I worked at a large fund called Draper Fisher Jurvetson for about 6 years, and then started my own fund about 2 years ago called 11-2 Capital. Where we're investing in mostly early stage companies in big data, security, smart hardware, and health. So it's also very different from the training I got. But I think it's been wonderful to just get that technical perspective when looking at companies, and also be able to come back to Berkeley from time to time to talk to many different experts in different fields.
Ed.
So I'm Ed Lee. I worked on the RAID project here with lots of other graduate students. Immediately after graduating, I went to Digital Systems Research Center. That was at a time when there were a significant number of industrial research labs. Many fewer now. I was there for about 7 years, but I really wanted to get more kind of into the product side. Actually see technology, how it impacts actual people and so forth. So after that, I joined a startup called Zambio. That was during the really kind of the hot .com boom, which promptly went bankrupt in about 1.5 to 2 years thereafter when the market crashed. After that, I joined a really small startup with only like less than 10 people. That also folded about 6 months later, so it was a much shorter period. So that's good. If you're going to fold, then it's good to fold early. After that, I joined Data Domain, and that was a very successful startup. I was there for 7 years. It went public about 7 years ago, and then it was acquired by EMC about 6 years thereafter. That was probably one of the first startups or storage startups that started being acquired for like 2.5 billion. That was kind of like the going rate. After Data Domain, every other storage startup after that, it's like 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. I sell on 2.5. 3PAR 2.5. You know, Nimble now is at around 2 billion, and then Pure is doing really well, so they're at 3.5. You can't sell Pure yet, so. So after Data Domain, I went to Tintree, which I'm gonna consider that my second successful startup. It hasn't IPO'd yet, though, so. They're preparing to IPO, however, and hopefully, they will do shortly. Of course, there's a lot of companies out there. Right? There's like crazy money out there right now. The market is pretty hot. So I was there at Tintree for about 5 years. The product was done. I was looking for some more interesting things to do. So I just recently left early this year to try to do something on my own. And so we closed our funding just 3 months ago. We moved into our permanent new office 1.5 months ago. And now we're trying to hire people like crazy and try to get some sleep at night. So mostly at a startup, the early days are fun. There's a lot more good stuff than bad stuff, but any change is kind of stressful. So that's where I am now. I'm hoping this works out well.
Do not poach any of our current PhD students till they're done.
Only if you send them our way, Randy.
So I think I have on me my word can hang up to that. So hi, I'm Todd Otis, and the story for me was we were working on this mobile stuff that Alon alluded to with our fun modems and whatnot, and I stumbled into a career fair, and I interviewed various places in the Valley, talked to a PhD in physics from Berkeley who was there, a really smart guy from Brown next to him, and I was thinking about where to go, and they're like, we're right here on Gilman Street. And I said, yeah, that sounds like a better I think I'll stay here. And that was 13 years ago, and so we also alluded to the very difficult funding environment at that time, so it was quite a challenge, and some very interesting stuff, growing that company from a dozen people to now 160. It's a place called Location Labs, originally Wave Market, and as of a year ago, about a week ago, we were acquired by ADG. And so that's been very exciting and fantastic, honestly. And so when you have 160 people, really the culture changes from 12 to 30 to 60 to 160, and then post-acquisition. And watching your role change from working on, say, like the earliest mobile phone software, which is J2ME, which doesn't even exist anymore, basically, to obviously now Android, iOS, whatever, more of a mobile platform guy. Watching those changes, and then watching your career change from being the guy just writing all the code to the person managing people and really focusing on making sure the engineers are getting the support they need has been pretty much my story. And we'll see where it leads, because basically shortly the acquisition will resolve itself, and maybe we'll have to spend another 13 years building another thing and see what happens.
Great.
Mark Stem, graduated in '99, got to ride the last .com boom and bust. Not the current one, the last one, at Fast Forward, and another smaller startup that lasted about a year for me. Then I went and stopped spam for about 12 years, so it was always great to, when my mom asks me, like, what do you do, I could actually explain it, and she could give me a hug, because, nobody likes spam. So I did that for about 12 years. Now I'm at a small startup, Jut, streaming, analytics, crunching, slice and dice your stuff. So.
Fang.
Yeah, so my name is Fang Yu, and I graduated from Berkeley in 2006. As most of the others, I went to a research lab. I joined Microsoft Research Silicon Valley, where I worked 7.5 years over there. It was actually a very good experience. And during Microsoft, we actually work with many product groups and help them protecting Hotmail, Bing, etc. And I saw a lot of attacks going on there, and the trend is going up. That's why my co-founder and me, both actually from Microsoft Research, left Microsoft in late 2013 to start a startup called DataVisor. We are actually building like a big data analytics solutions using Spark. And then on top of it, we help protect all kinds of large websites, for example, Yelp, Momo, etc.
Great. Now, just listening to the little career paths of the former students who are up here, I did pick up on sort of the sort of people networks that you have built over your careers and how you've kind of, because that's always been sort of like my understanding of the startup culture is if it fails, you still learn things, met people that you sometimes bring with you to the next opportunity, or they bring you with the next opportunity. Todd is nodding his head. He's been at the same startup the entire time. But I wonder, just in terms of sort of, if you could say anything about that. This guy has worked with his UCLA buddy in 3 different companies or something like that. How have you sort of, with thinking about it, or it just happened, develop those people networks that are sort of following you as you go from company to company to company? For those for whom that's the case, and maybe it isn't always the case, but several of you did seem to mention that. So anyone on the panel who wants to sort of jump in and talk about how you cultivate the people networks, even if the company is not going to be successful, that you could draw on as you move forward to the next kind of entrepreneurial opportunity.
I think you just respect you run into people and you respect them and you gain the trust, and I think that's kind of what you look to for the next job. When I was looking at Judd, a lot of Fast Forward alumni that are there, and so I'm like, I'm going to hit them up because I trusted them and really enjoyed my time with them. So I think that was really valuable. Also, I think at the small companies, like there's so much chaos and you're building so much from nothing that you really want to have people you trust to go do that, because you don't want to learn them as a person and as a colleague while you're already building software, building process, building all this other stuff.
So I definitely second that, but there's 2 things. One is basically if you go do a real small startup, you really want to have like relationship with people in the company for 2 reasons. One is you can basically like do a lot of work together. And not only that, you can have like a lot of opinion, and sometimes you will fight, and fight a lot actually. And then you want to have like a very solid, basically respect of each other, even when you fight, because like for small startup, right? Like even strategy and stuff like that, like people will disagree, and like you have to live. The other thing is I spent time at Google, which is a big company. So that is slightly different. Although I build up friendship and relations in there, the thing that I also learned is basically, like how to build big system, like you develop other skills and how to manage like, like teams and so on that help you with, startup later. So.
I guess from an investor's perspective, when we look at startups, we like startups that are formed by people who have already known each other for a long time versus just banging together for last 6 months. Because we have seen quite a few that fail because the dynamics don't work out personally.
I will comment about the head nod. Even though I've been at the same place for 13 years, over the course of that, we've built a dozen different products that have failed or not failed. And over the course of it, you meet people at every other startup because you're in that community. And being able to, first of all, you compete and you sometimes size each other up and you watch each other fail or succeed. And you build these relationships that are absolutely crucial. And even if you don't change companies, when you walk into these environments, and by the way, Berkeley is crucial for that. It's absolutely unbelievable how many people you meet just through these Berkeley connections and how powerful those connections are, because you're always finding kind of the smartest people in the room. And, oh yeah, I know you. And that's a beautiful thing, and people know this.
Yeah, I think the relationships and networking are obviously super important. And you're in a startup, you're kind of working really closely with a very close-knit team. So kind of the relationships and network almost get built automatically as you're just kind of working there. Of course, if you're more on kind of the business side, then you do have to be more active in terms of talking to VCs or other people kind of more, in the business community. But, on a technical side, like your reputation your work kind of speaks for you in terms of the reputation and how you work with other people and you treat them. So like especially if you want to, at some point, want to do your own startup, then building up that kind of base of networking and respect is what essentially allows you to kind of launch your company and then recruit other really good people to work there. So. And of course, the respect you kind of generate in the industry with just by reputation with VCs and so forth.
Yeah, so I wonder, another topic that kind of came up when you were sort of introducing yourselves was looking for a job or the next opportunity, or we're hiring. So what are you experiencing in this boom time in terms of the ability to identify quality people? What are you looking for in their skill sets? You're working your networks, but that may not be sufficient. So, just how hard, easy is it, probably not so easy, to recruit in the current environment, and what are you looking for? If anyone wants to dive in on that.
I spend a lot of time recruiting. I spend a lot of time interviewing, and unfortunately, firing is another big, really difficult thing that happens once you're very senior in an organization. Sometimes you'll even have hired someone who doesn't work out, and you're like, I can't believe I hired this person. I could have sworn she was going to be fantastic. And so it's very difficult. And the current environment is honestly, it's a buyer's environment, assuming the buyer is the engineer. And so really your training in academia has been a crucial part of it, because you're not just asking algorithms questions and then sitting there quietly. That's not going to sell your company. You actually have to have a rapport and really teach that algorithm and allow the person together for the two of you to work on it, or otherwise, kind of clarify how things work. And it's this very funny push-pull of how much you're selling when you're interviewing and how much you're trying to let the person speak and just being quiet. So I'm sure people could go on and on about that process. It's a huge part of my time.
And when you're selling the company, it never hurts to say, UC Berkeley PhD on the.
Oh, that's a great one.
I think a lot of time. The process of hiring, especially in a competitive environment like this, is probably not unlike the process of figuring out who your students are going to be, that you're going to spend the next several years on, and frankly stake your reputation on, and have to rely on them. And I think that the push-pull, or kind of the two-sided piece of the interview, where you're interviewing somebody, but of course somebody is interviewing you, and they're looking at you saying, okay, how is this person going to help me in my career? How is this person going to be when I come into work? Everybody knows that there's always unknowns, but everybody's looking in a market like this, where people have a lot of choices on both sides, but especially on the interviewee side of the equation. There definitely is, I think, an advantage to coming from an environment that is an academic environment, where there is an emphasis on creative thinking, there is an emphasis on asking questions and pushing people to explore and develop potential and go down different routes. Just being able to communicate that way, convey that to people, even if it's a relatively, I would say, mundane role that you're hiring for, that maybe doesn't require all of the academic curiosity that maybe we associate with it. Just the culture that cultivates creates very much a place where people want to work at. And that's something that, certainly in my experience, tends to resonate well. And frankly, if it doesn't resonate, it's probably not a good match.
And also hiring process, especially in small startup, also has something to do with the relationship you built current or the previous workspaces, because reference checking goes both ways, right? Not only we do, but also the employee, my prospective employee, also ask about what is these guys doing in their workplace, something like that, because they don't come to the company because of the name, but they just see who they are working with, they are going to working with, so they're just asking around. So it's really important to make a good relationship with your previous or current workplace.
Yeah, so I always find it amusing when I hear former students say, about how selective the process is that the professor has chosen the student. Someone walks into the office and wants to work with me? Yeah! So, you may have perceived it differently, but... Now, one of the things I heard a lot about is, the thing that makes sort of attractive to recruit people is, to some extent, the culture, the advanced technology, and so on. So I'm wondering, traditionally, Berkeley whenever you read in the press about, sort of a head-to-head comparison of Stanford versus Berkeley, Stanford has an entrepreneurial culture, founded Silicon Valley, goes all the way back to Fred Terman, all this kind of in the 1950s. There's this whole history, public relations, retelling of a story about how Stanford has been cheek by jowl with industrial development in Silicon Valley. Berkeley has always had more of a reputation and perspective of being, sort of the academically ivory tower, somewhat removed, at least in the way it's presented in the press. So I'm wondering, the question I have for all of you is, to think back at your graduate school experiences at Berkeley, did you feel that Berkeley had an entrepreneurial culture? Was there anything that Berkeley, in the environment at Berkeley, that assisted you when you went down the entrepreneurial path? And it's perfectly okay if the answer to this question is no, but it'd be interesting to hear if you, and particularly as you also span several generations and ages, Gun-Ho being the most recent PhD, and maybe someone like Ilan being the eldest up here. So,
yeah. So yes, I guess you could kind of categorize into two different categories. In one aspect, it was very entrepreneurial in the sense that I think there's a lot of projects at Berkeley that are very kind of team-oriented. The professors are really creating an environment, identifying a big problem, and then allowing the students to go out and identify interesting problems and solve them. And that whole kind of critical thinking process is very kind of central to doing startups and so forth. And I think that was tremendously beneficial. And actually, it's one of the reasons I really like doing startups. I loved my time here as a graduate student, and I wanted to recreate those experiences to a certain extent. On the other side is kind of the financial type of thing where you hear about graduate students quitting, or at least suspending their degree program, even professors leaving, going to startups, and some never coming back and so on. And from that perspective, Berkeley is less so. Like I don't remember filing any patents on RAID. If we had Randy, I think you'd have a different retirement program.
No, I would have spent my life in court probably trying to defend those patents.
Well, I mean, just to tell you, like how this kind of grew from that whole thing. It's a different time, right? Different era. But like, I had never heard of EMC really, and I didn't know they were using RAID. So, and yet, if you look at the storage systems that are available today, it'd be hard pressed to buy one without RAID. Like, try to go and buy a storage system without RAID today. You can't do it, right? And yet, we were kind of not familiar with it. I guess if the RAID project had started today, maybe one or two graduate students would have left in the middle, or at least immediately thereafter, and created some companies. But that wasn't. But I think there's a big benefit to actually having students finish their program. I mean, they've given up on a short-term opportunity that exists, but technology changes very rapidly, and you learn you get so much out of kind of completing that whole process. And so I wonder whether longer term, all of these students that are leaving early today, it might not serve not just them, but the whole kind of industry better if they had stayed. And even though they would have missed out on that opportunity, they would have made a bigger contribution in the next one. So.
Well, one of the things that's great about the United States is you get to make your choice, and live with it. So.
I think I would concur with most of the points that you made. I would say back in 2005, when I graduated, there wasn't a ton of entrepreneurial-related resources.
That was a dip in 2005.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of focus on publications, and I think that's probably part of the reason why I went into a different path. But I think today things have changed a lot. So there's a lot of really practical and applicable work coming out of Berkeley, both in the CS department and also here, a lot of robotics work. And I'm just really excited to see all of that changing and transforming. It's still not quite as coherent, I would say, as a whole as Stanford, but because there's so many different programs here that support entrepreneurs, in a way it's a little bit confusing. But just seeing all of that changing and moving towards entrepreneurship is great, I think.
Randy, if you still remember, when I graduated, before I graduated, I asked you, the work I did on the PhD thesis is on like the fast pattern matching stuff. Yeah, and I asked you whether should we start a startup, and your question to me was, do you know any business people? I said no. And he said probably that's not a good idea because the first one usually doesn't succeed. To look back, I think probably that's a good choice.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leads to sort of an interesting sort of follow-on question, which is any good stories about some bad advice that I gave you, or alternatively, stories of being grabbed by some MBA student in the halls of Soda Hall. What are you working on? I want to. Anything along those lines that you had any experience with here?
There was a lot of that, I remember.
Well, that was in that first boom.
In that first boom. In that first boom, I mean, this is in 97, 98.
Yeah.
It was remarkable. I mean, what happened here, all of a sudden we were sitting, all my 443 Soda Hall guys, are all here at 100% attendance. It's great. We're sitting there, and all of a sudden there's these suits coming back and forth constantly. And this is when Yogan Dalal was at Mayfield, and so there was still this academic connection. I mean, today the VC crowd is so spread out, but at the time, the VC community was much smaller and much more tightly integrated also into the academic institution, Berkeley in particular. It was I don't know that there was as much pressure, but it was clear that something was happening. It was, you started feeling that tension of, should I finish, should I go, should I finish, should I go? I mean, I remember a conversation with the late and great Rich Newton, right, who basically, I had exactly that conversation with him. A couple years, Netscape goes public in 95, 96, and we're having a conversation of, okay, so now what? And he gave me advice, which was, I mean, I stuck with it, and it's great advice, which is, I think, basically, you finish this, you will look back at it, and you will realize throughout your career why that was the right advice. And I agree that there is absolutely no substitute for finishing up the grad degree. I obviously can't relate to the pressures today inside of, with the startup environment being what it is. But there's no question that if anybody asked me in the middle of their PhD or graduate career whether or not they should leave and go found a startup or finish it up, you never, of course, I think most, if not everybody here obviously knows this, you will never have a period of time like that graduate period of time where you get to look at a problem, think as deeply as you want about it, spend whatever time you need on it. That's a luxury that goes out the door the minute you get off that treadmill. I mean, there's obviously different satisfaction doing it on the business side, but that never comes back.
Well, that leads to kind of another follow-up question. So thanks, Ed. Do you recalls this conversation, which of course I don't. Do you know any business people? Don't do a startup. And Ilan, you said one of your startups was your sort of on the front line, in the firing squad, MBA kind of thing. So in your experience, did you ever feel like you really needed business training to do what you were doing? Is it something that you kind of learned on the job? What is your kind of level of respect for people who sort of pursue education in business as opposed to like doing the business, since you have to come across and deal with these people in in sort of a startup environment that's unlike the academic environment? So
I think that last point is, I mean, I won't judge MBAs or not MBAs. I think I will say that I will say, and I'll play to the crowd something that I do agree with, that having a technical background is much more valuable in a business scenario than an MBA. I always say, my technical background in a business setting means nobody can bullshit me. And you'd be surprised how quickly, that immediately grounds conversations. Immediately people are talking about the right stuff. The people that don't know what they're talking about don't open up their mouth. I mean, it's fantastic. But there is an element of, obviously, business that is very different than what we do in academia and what we do on the technical side of the house. And being able to understand how businesses operate being able to understand how, what it means to be a business and what is important is something, and being able to communicate. I mean, the question you asked of communicating with these people, you have to interface and communicate. That side of the house is an important side of the house, and you have to be able to understand how they operate and how they think, and ultimately, if you can, drive them to where you want to drive them. But whether or not you need an MBA for that is probably a separate discussion, but I think you do have to understand certain aspects of business if you want to be successful in that area.
I think it won't kill you if you learn some business, but I wouldn't force yourself to do it if that's not your real interest. In order to do things like startups, you're going to need talented people of various kind of things, so you're going to have to build a team really. So I think it's much more productive to focus on the thing that you're really interested in, that you're really good at, and really focus on that, and then find other people who are good at other areas to help you.
This isn't exactly a spirited defense, but I would say that our CEO he was a young kid out of MBA from Harvard, and watching him grow and working with him has been a real joy, and that has been an incredible experience, and currently I've learned a ton from him. I know exactly what our revenue is, what our projections are, what our profit is, and I know how to talk to people. I can stand in for him if I need to. I go to Sand Hill. I think I don't think just the technical side is enough. You absolutely need someone who can handle that aspect of it, and anyone can do it. You just need a little bit of education.
Yeah, that actually leads to another follow-on question related to life in a startup company, particularly for someone who's done several of them, has a PhD or advanced degree. So what is it like to actually interact with and deal with and pitch with venture capitalists? Is it like the TV show Silicon Valley, where they're, or Shark Tank, where they're basically mind raping you, like in the TV show Silicon Valley? So, do you have any good stories of sort of wild things that happened, or how hard it is to get funding, or you don't have to worry about these things?
I haven't been on that side.
Be careful, she's a venture capitalist.
I've had nothing but amazing experiences, like box seats at Giants games and stuff.
I see. So the venture capitalists are wining and dining you.
Yes.
That's really interesting, because I haven't really seen them be particularly generous.
I think especially right now, it's a buyer's market, right? Or it's a startups market. So a lot of VCs are chasing after promising ideas. So I think as long as a technical founder, as long as you can pitch the problem that you're solving, because a lot of times we get enamored with the technology and not talk about the market or the paying as much. I think as long as you can pitch that clearly, there's a lot of VCs who love deeper technology startups, and there are some good ones.
Yeah, I think from my experience, actually, neither me or my co-founder actually have business background. Both of us actually technology background. We both work at Microsoft. When we first did the seed round last year, and then we were pitched to VCs, and then we inevitably you have a business plan sheet, and you have to show the revenue, how it grows like, and then we come up with some numbers, and we look at each other and say, okay, that's the number, and then we show it to VCs, and then they actually didn't pick on it, and they said the market is actually bigger than you thought, so they're actually okay with all the business part, and they are actually more interested on the technology side, and also the people, especially as Sherry said, whether you work together for a while, the founding teams, who are you going to recruit, and who is going to work with you. That's most important for them.
So I have some experience talking with VC too. What I notice is basically it depends on what startup you're doing. If you're doing consumer startup, right, they basically gauge how likely this technology or consumer product that you're building, right, will be successful, right, and that's pretty much you cannot have a choice on what the value, because it's hard. So the value is more like how fast they believe you can basically gain the number of consumer, get traction. So for a startup that is basically like my company, So we have a longer term vision. When you pitch and you have a longer term vision, right? Typically they look at more like the people, like the team, basically, and they value based on that. So, I mean, I have a dinner with Mark Andreessen, and he, so he basically, try and convince us to join them. But at the same time, right, you also have to look at the VC that will actually help you. So VC tends to, there's some top VCs, right, and they say try to recruit you and then basically assign to someone. And that's not what you want on your board. So basically, for more experienced startup, I would basically look at that more, especially for the long term. And if you're into enterprise or basically, for helping you with basically strategy and selling. Consumer startup is a little bit different because it's actually, you just try your luck, right? And, a lot of VCs just spread out money and, hopefully, one of them will gain them 10 to 100x. So.
Yeah, the interesting is that when we were seeking for the seed funding, so as a CTO or as a chief engineer, I was ready to show them that we have enough technology or technical competence. And then as soon as they see, oh, so you are Berkeley PhD with Randy Katz, so what's your business model? I never got asked about the technical questions, so that was kind of interesting.
Right.
So,
well, I think we're kind of coming up to just the last couple of minutes, and so I wanted to just do one round around the panel on, there are several graduate students who are in the room right now who are kind of where you were back just before you finished your PhD or so on. So, some of them are probably going to want to follow in an industrial entrepreneurial path, undoubtedly. So one pithy, short piece of advice to those students that are out there. We'll start with Yao.
I would say, this is your grad study is going to be a chance of a lifetime, and it's very hard to basically come back. So if you really, if you can basically delay your, interest in entrepreneur, I would say basically what Ilan has said, basically try to get your work done here first before leaving.
So my advice might be, you never know what will happen in next month. So for example, when I was graduating, I didn't even apply for OPT because I was thinking to coming back to Korea. But in some morning, I struck with something, and then just in case, so that I thought, apply for the OPT, and then end up returning to Berkeley 2 months later. So you never know, so just be prepared.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to probably start sounding repetitive, but I think obviously finish your degree. You won't regret it. It gives you a tool, obviously a toolkit for both a technical or business career. Even though it looks obviously when you're younger that life is over in 5 years and oh my God, I've got to make the most of it. I think there's only thing being the elder person that I can say. It comes and goes and comes and goes.
Yes.
I mean, so take advantage of the 2 or 3 years that you have here in preparation for the 20 or 30 years that you're going to be taking advantage of it.
I guess I would say find out what you really, truly love doing, and then do everything you can to pursue that.
Find people smarter than yourself that you respect and enjoy working with.
My advice is really you have to be who you are. And we are, for example, very much a Berkeley company. It speaks back to this question about Stanford versus Berkeley. That is one of the things I sell. And I point where I can see the Campanile from our windows, and I say, that's who we are. And anyone addressing you knows whether you're lying or whether you're really solid with the people you're working with or not, or whether your story is sound. And so that's really what it comes down to.
I'm good. Open source it and use it to build a community that validates the company you want to start. I think you guys at Berkeley has done that so many times in so many ways, and I think it's really fantastic.
And if you want to start a startup, find someone that you want to work with together, and so because it's a long journey and a teamwork.
Excellent. Let's thank our panelists.